Hello and welcome, and I am back. It is Wednesday, July the 10th, and I'm here from vacation. I went to Canada for July 4th, which is not America's birthday there. It's my parents' anniversary. We went to a hotel way up north, and it was a lot. Family can be a lot. And I'm sure I'll talk about more of the trials and tribulations of this hotel, including being spied on from our balcony later in the show. Oh, I should say what show this is. It's This Is Going Well, I think, with David Cooper. I am David Cooper. It's This Is Going Well, I think. The show where no one's listening. No one cares. That show where every episode's the last episode. Today's show is going to oscillate from silly and fun to serious, and then all the way to interesting. The serious part? There is a very interesting, rather startling piece written in the Toronto Star by Andrea Robin Skinner. That is Nobel laureate Alice Munro's daughter. She has spoke out about childhood sexual abuse by her stepfather. She's saying that her mother, Alice Munro, knew about it and she chose to stay with him. So Gary Direnfeld and I, for Therapy Thursdays on a Wednesday, are going to tackle this difficult one, this serious one, and cover the topic of childhood sexual abuse. After that, things will get interesting as we talk about the core of the Earth. Now, the Earth rotates, and so too does the core, but the inner core of the Earth has recently slowed down so much that it's gone in reverse. What does this mean about the Earth's magnetic field? Will your compasses stop working? And will the Earth's magnetic field still protect us from the sun's evil toxic rays? These are all questions that we will answer with a professor of global geophysics. Oh, and the fun part of the show, that's coming up in about 10 minutes with science expert Dan Riskin. It's insects. Dan is going to tell us about how ants amputate their peers and talk about a bee sting that happened in a man's eyeball. And by request from science man Dan Riskin, here's a little tease of what you're going to hear in my conversation with him.
If you haven't listened, listener, to the last segment where we got into the coconut testicles, I really think you should get back there. It was very funny. I had a great time.
Why wouldn't they have made it there? Because they'd have to be there to get to hear.
I guess you heard it, listener. But tease this episode with what I just said.
Oh, God.
Because, listener, coming up, testicle talk with the coconuts. It's really good.
Except we already talked about it, but now you want me to put this at the beginning.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, just put this, just tease, a little clip, on this episode, and then you play that.
So people hear this having, you already said it, but you knowing that it will come because it's in the past.
Yeah.
And then you want me to take all of this and put it in the beginning, including what I'm saying now.
Yep.
Great radio. If you've got a horrendous work ethic, that might cause problems for you. But if your work ethic is world-class bad, you could win an award. Let me explain. We go to Spain, where a civil servant has achieved what many of us can only dream of, being paid to do absolutely nothing for 6 glorious years. And yes, that is correct. 6 years of sweet, sweet nothingness, all on the Spanish taxpayer's dime. The civil servant, a man now 69, was only caught when someone decided to give him a long service award. That's right, he was about to win an award for being great at his job when he was not showing up and collecting a paycheck for 6 years. That is irony. The man was supposed to be supervising the building of a wastewater treatment plant, but honestly, he was more like a ghost in the system. Hence, his new nickname, El Funtario Fantasma. Did I say that right? I don't know, but they're calling him the Phantom Official. I wonder if he could kind of float through the walls too. Not important. Now, you might think this man spent those 6 years, binge watching Netflix or perfecting his golf swing, but when asked about it, he said he took a more scholarly approach. He dedicated his time to reading philosophy. A regular Socrates, pondering the meaning of life, the meaning of work, while collecting a €37,000 a year paycheck. Who says you can't get paid to think deep thoughts? But when all this came to light, when he was nominated for an award and people realized he wasn't showing up for work, he was fined by a court that wasn't too thrilled with his philosophical pursuits, and that amount cost him €27,000, which is $10,000 less than he made over 6 years. Honestly, slightly less than a year's salary. Ouch, but honestly, not that much ouch. The man, of course, denies everything. He claims he was a victim of political bullying. As such, he has now gone into hiding, saying the media won't stop attacking him. I imagine he's somewhere in a remote Spanish village, I don't know, sipping sangria and reading The Art of War. His boss claims he hadn't seen the man for years, despite having an office right across from him. Turns out the water company thought he wasn't at the office because he was being watched on the job by local authorities. And the local authorities on the job, they thought he was at the office. Ah, the classic case of, I thought you were watching him. It's like a sitcom, except a little less entertaining and costing the taxpayers a fair amount of money. Now, this man's story has inspired lazy people around the world. This man, the hero that us lazy people didn't know we needed. And because he's denying all this, he's even asked public officials to not have to pay the fine. Good luck with that one, buddy. So here's to you, Spanish civil servant, who got paid for 6 years of not working, the phantom official, the hero of lazy, and proof that sometimes doing nothing is really an art form. We go now to Arkansas, where a mom went to visit her troublemaking son at a county juvenile detention center. Sounds like a wholesome family reunion, right? Wrong! Instead, that mother found herself on the wrong side of the law. Yes, she got slapped with misdemeanor charges for stealing candy from juvey. And not just any candy, people. Candy from a cancer fundraising machine. Awful. You can't make this up. Here's what happened. The mom walked up to the machine, tried to buy some candy, but no dice. So what does she do? She shoves the machine against the wall and then backhands the glass like it owes her money. The glass, of course, shatters, and she grabs handfuls and handfuls of candy, casually pocketing them. And if that wasn't enough, she tries to take the broken glass to a juvenile detention center official and says, "Oops, the machine broke." What a move. Now, the woman wasn't flying solo in this candy caper, however. She had an accomplice who also helped themselves to a couple of sweet treats, and those two went around the lobby, visited the other vending machines, and tried to score free candy from them too. Because if you're going to commit a crime once, you might as well commit that exact crime multiple times. You can't get in trouble for that, right? Not exactly. When a sheriff's deputy caught up with the woman, she claimed the machine ate her money because the candy was stuck. She said she was just trying to, quote, loosen the candy when the thing broke. Come on. But here's why this story isn't just funny, it's awful. The candy machine belonged to the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. So this woman, not just stealing candy, she's stealing it from kids with cancer. Anyway, she got cited and released, but she's due in court later this year. So remember, next time your candy gets stuck, maybe just let it go. It's not worth the court date. It's not worth stealing money from kids with leukemia and lymphoma, and definitely not worth the teasing that will make at your expense. Coming up in a few moments, it's the Science Appliance with Dan Riskin. We'll talk the intersection of insects. Actually, there won't be any intersections, but he'll tell us about how ants amputate their nest mates, and also a man who got stung by a bee in his eyeball. It's the Science Appliance Reliance with Daniel K. Riskin, who's grinning from ear to ear. He is a science communicator, media science man. What is your official job title when you come and do these appearances, Dan?
Mostly, I like to think of myself as a man about town. I think that's maybe a good title for me, man about town. Father
to 100 children with 200 different women. He's a man about town.
Yeah, well, there's a tomcat, if you will. I think of myself as I talk about science to whoever who will listen, I guess, is the
science
shtick.
Speaker to those who listen is your...
Yeah. I love speaking on the science topics. You were recently taking a little bit of time in Canada, were you not?
I was. I went to the northern part of the province. Well, no, actually not. The northern part of the southern part of the province.
What people in Toronto call the northern part of the province, which is what, like 3 hours north of here?
I believe they call it North Ontario instead of Northern Ontario.
Okay, because Northern Ontario is Hudson's Bay. There's polar bears up there.
Yeah, there's like not a lot of roads or people. That's the Arctic, basically.
It's literally, basically, I don't know if literally, basically, those are contradictory terms.
Fundamentally, essentially, literally, and basically the Arctic.
it's up for sure. But you weren't there. Did you see any polar bears?
I did not. I saw a duck.
Nice.
And some seagulls. Oh, I saw 2 baby foxes running across the road. My brother slammed on the brakes. These foxes don't know how to avoid cars, but why should they? You know, they've gone, 20 years evolving since the dawn of man to not have to deal with cars, and now cars.
Sure.
Maybe more than
a baby
20 years.
fox is called a kit, I believe.
They were so cute.
Named after a Knight Rider.
I've never seen a cuter animal in my life. I am not one to be like, oh, it's a cute gibbon. No, I think animals are disgusting. They pick their noses, first of all. Second of all, they poop. They don't wipe their butts. They're disgusting. Animals are gross. Can we just acknowledge that animals are gross?
I think the fact that animals don't need to wipe their butts is a reason to embrace them. I mean, humans are the gross ones. And the fact that we poop and then it's like with half of it still stuck there and it has to be removed, that's messed up. Like, no animal has that problem. Have you ever seen a horse poop? Like, its bum closes up. It's like it's like that big thing on the Death Star that shot people in the new Star Wars trilogy, the ones that came out more recently. Like, that thing shoots out the red fire, and then the door closes. Like it shuts, and a horse's bum does that after it poops. It opens, it poops, it closes. Human bums, to my knowledge, don't do that.
Dan, you're a man of science, so I've got a very scientific question for you.
Okay.
Why is it that if you got a little poo, say, on your forearm, maybe it was yours, maybe it was someone else's.
Sure.
You wouldn't just take a piece of paper and wipe it off and be like, it's fine. You would run right to the shower. You'd be like, oh my God, the most disgusting thing just happened to me. Get it off, disinfect it. Why? Why? How? How could this have happened? I feel gross. I got to run into the shower. You would not just take a piece of paper and wipe it and be like, it's fine. But when we wipe our rear ends, that's all we do. And we just go about our lives like it's fine. Yeah. But if we get poop on any other part of our body, we need to go into full disinfect mode, full sanitize mode, full shower mode. It's kind of weird that it's like, oh, one piece of paper, it's fine.
It is weird. I once, when I was in university, there was these 2 women, and how did it work? They had a male roommate, I think, and multiple times they'd gone into the bathroom, or one of them had gone into the bathroom, and they'd found poop in the toilet, but there was no toilet paper. And so finally they confronted this guy, and they were like, how come there's poop in the toilet, but no toilet paper? Don't you wipe your bum? And he said, no, I get in the shower afterwards every time. Like, this guy's thing was he preferred to use the shower to clean himself as opposed to the toilet paper, which is just a different spin on things. Really sets you up for limited windows for the ability to poop. I mean, you really have to poop right before you're going to shower.
True. Now, the human body can hold things when it's anxious, or, you hold on to it until you get home. Not important. My girlfriend is a nervous pooper. She can only poop at home. Can't poop at work. She has a stomachache, she comes home.
Nervous pooper makes it sound like she poops when she's nervous, which would be the opposite of what you're saying. Like, usually she's too nervous. She's a nervous unpooper.
Animals do that. It's gross. Back onto animals being gross. But maybe this guy's not the crazy one. This guy is like what we would do for any other part of our body. He just extends it to all of his body, whereas us, we're just like, piece of tissue paper, it's fine. You're a man of science. Answer the question.
I believe I've deflected the question as a man of the world.
Usually I like to take more than 5 minutes before I know you regret coming on this show. But today...
Has it been 5 minutes? It feels like it's been an hour. But you bring up some important points, and I'm glad we're discussing them.
Daniel K. Riskin, Batman. Not to be confused with the comic book Batman. You're a literal Batman. I was in Canada. It was very nice. We went up to Lake Muskoka.
And is that in the Muskokas?
I think so. I don't know. What are the Muskokas versus Lake Muskoka?
I'll be totally honest with you. I didn't know there was a Lake Muskoka. I just thought the Muskokas was an area. So I guess you probably it's named after that lake, I would guess, or maybe the lake is named after the area, but I doubt that. We went to a hotel that wasn't that great, but it was very beautiful, and I hung out with my family, and they annoyed me, as they do. It wasn't that great, but it was very beautiful. In what way was it not great? The facility was not amazing, and to make matters worse, they had workmen working on the hotel, and we, many years ago in San Francisco, had a break-in, and I was in bed on sleeping medication and alcohol. I used to drink a lot, and I just didn't seem to care that there was a break-in in progress. So my girlfriend got out of bed and confronted this home intruder. He ran away. She's fine. But ever since, she's been very triggered by noises or any perception of lack of safety while she sleeps. Yeah. So
At night, we have a balcony. It's just a balcony. It's not connected to anything. It's just hanging off the side of the building. Not even the neighbor. You know, you'd have to jump 15 feet or 10 feet. You couldn't get to this balcony, okay?
You could. I'll bet somebody could. Somebody could do it. Some really, really nimble. Someone named Jack could do it.
So at 12 midnight, she's a little scared. She's like, is the balcony door locked? And I said, listen, Miranda, I don't think someone's going to take a ladder and come up to the balcony and then rob us.
Oh, no.
But if it will make you more comfortable, I will get out of bed and I will lock the balcony. I know that you're triggered by noises and lack of safety, and that's fine. I think she's like, do you think anyone would do that? I said, no, absolutely not in a million years. But if you would feel more comfortable, I'll go and lock that for you. So
you are a good man.
In the morning, 2 workmen had taken a ladder and gotten on the balcony and were painting our balcony without any notice. And she was laying in bed naked. I mean, she was covered by the sheets. That was the level of service of the hotel. You'd think they would just call or slide a note under the door. Like it was. Yeah. And my brother had
funny.
And my brother had the same thing.
That's funny.
It was.
Do they even work there, or are they just some guys that are like, oh, it's summer, let's get the ladder and go have ourselves a time?
The hotel said that they worked there and that they would get them to stop. They just didn't stop. They were up there all day. It was not a great hotel, but it was a lovely time, and my parents were lovely to do that for us. My parents were bankrolling the whole thing. Very nice.
Oh, nice.
It was their 50th anniversary, so they wanted to do something special.
That's nice.
So it was nice.
50th anniversary. Wow, that's amazing.
You are going to Antigua soon.
No, I'm Anguilla.
Oh, that's the one.
Yeah, it's an island in the Caribbean. I'm going on. Well, I don't know when you're gonna. When do you air this? I know it's live, but when are we talking again? I forget where we are and what day it is.
What day is it today on the calendar?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the calendar and I'm trying to remember what it says.
It's coming out today, July the 10th. It is coming out.
It is July 10th. This is live. This is a live conversation. It's July 10th. Yes. Yeah, we're leaving on Sunday. We're going to Anguilla.
Nice. For a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
1 week. 1 week. I'll be there. My brother's family will be there. My dad lives there. My sister will be there. It'll be a whole thing. It's going to be a big get together.
You got an Anguillan father. Has he always been there or more a retirement
He
thing?
moved there about 30 years ago.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
Island man.
Yeah, he's an island man, and it's a nice island. We've got kids, and it's quite expensive to get there, so we haven't gone. We went once when we had one kid. I don't think we've been with the twins. I've been waiting until they can form permanent memories, because it's a total waste of money to take kids on.
Why blow a bunch of cash on a fancy vacation for a kid who's not even going to remember it?
Exactly. So they're old enough now that they're forming permanent memories, so that's taken care of. So that's happening. And then second, I wanted to make sure they were far enough in their swim lessons that if they fall out of a boat, they're not going to die, because that just wrecks a trip. So we should be good.
That'll be great. I'm excited for you.
Yeah, I'm sure to have a good time. I'm very excited. So I'll give you the full deets on that when I get back. I just got my net, my butterfly net in the mail, so I intend to try to catch a bat while I'm there.
So you are going to do some science stuff while you're there?
Well, I mean, it's not really science. I'm going to go try to catch a bat and take some pictures of it. I'm not going to put a radio track on it and publish a scientific paper or anything like that. But I mean, every time I go somewhere, I'll be looking to see what animals I can see, and I'll be putting them in eBird and putting them in iNaturalist and keeping track of that stuff, because that's just how you live life. That's not science. That's just living.
Well, animals. We're going to talk about them when we come back with Daniel K. Riskin, science expert. We'll talk ants that should have been in the Civil War and bees that sting your eyeballs in just a few moments. Believing is better believing. Words no one has said ever. I'm here with science expert Daniel K. Riskin, PhD, who went to Cornell, a small school in, I don't even know where Cornell is. Ithaca.
It's in Ithaca, New York. Ithaca.
Yeah.
Ithaca. And, I had the great fortune of going and looking for pictures of a place in Ithaca at Cornell University called Barton Hall. Barton Hall is this big, huge, it looks like an airplane hangar, but it's a military hangar. So there's something called ROTC in the States where if you're in the military, they pay for university. And so they have an ROTC thing at Cornell. And anyway, there's just it's the Army and all this other stuff there. But that's where you take big exams. So like at a normal school, you take exams in a gym. But there you take them in this giant, and it's really a beautiful space. It's got a really high ceiling, and it's got these stained glass windows, and it's got banners for all the Ivy League schools. So you can memorize which ones are the Ivy League schools. There's 8 of them. I used to know that list. I bet you I could come up with it, but it doesn't matter. And then there's a track you can run around, and it just keeps turning up in places. Like, remember I sent you a video of the bicycle, this tricycle-bicycle hybrid?
Mm-hmm.
The video of that thing being ridden by students who are trying to turn this thing, which for mechanical reasons can't be turned. Really interesting invention. That's in Barton Hall. And also, like, I gave tests when I was a TA for biology. I gave tests in that room, so the whole room like full of these desks and people taking exams. And then I also took exams in there when I took those math classes that are now infamous in my mind because I was on a curve against a bunch of engineering students and I had to get a good grade or I was going to have to drop out of my PhD program and I was all stressed. And anyway, but I got to go back and look for pictures of that because high ceilings and exams are in the news.
Very good. Oh, we're going to talk about that in a moment. But first, the thing I teased, Dan.
Oh, you teased. Do we have to do the thing you teased first? Is that how it works? I thought a tease, you could put it at the end of the segment and then people will stick around to listen.
Fine, let's talk about high ceilings.
No, I've teased mine now and I want to tease. I think the high ceiling one should go later now and we should do yours now. You're the boss, man. I'm just trying to go along with the flow. I thought you were teasing to the end. I didn't mean to over tease you.
I'm so confused. Okay. Tell me about how amputation worked in ye olden days of muskets and loading a gun with a rod, and you kept the gunpowder in a little satchel or whatever they did with the bullets. What do they call those little bullet balls? They had a name.
Bullet balls. No, they were called bullet balls.
No, they were called something else. The little balls that you put in a musket.
Little balls. They called them little balls.
A bullet is a contraption that has a shell on the back with gunpowder and then the bullet's in the front. People think the whole thing's the bullet. But
is it not?
The bullet's just the thing in the front.
Oh.
That shoots out of the gun. But the whole thing's got gunpowder. I'm not a big gun knowledgeable person.
No,
anyway,
me neither. I know nothing about guns. But I do know a thing or two about amputations.
But wait, we got to look at balls you put in the... musket balls! There you go. There you go. Musket balls.
They're not little balls or whatever we called them? Or
no, they're not little balls. Sir, hand me the little balls to put in my musket. No, it's, sir, hand me the musket.
Those little balls.
Hand me the musket balls.
The musket. Very quickly they realized they needed a different word for that after Private Ryan and his privates. Okay.
That came very much later. No, there'd be the general and he'd be like, hand me the little balls to put in the and then he'd get shot. That'd be it. It was too long. But then they did another trial.
Musket balls.
Where they said, hand me the musket balls. And then after he said balls, the guy ducked and then the bullet flew over him and he survived. And that's why it's a shorter
But was it a bullet that flew over him or was it a musket ball?
Well, it depends on what the opposing side had. Did the opposing side have little balls to put in their muskets? Or did they have... Right. If this is funny for anyone, they're psychotic.
I'm having a great time. Your listeners are just like, kill me. They're just pulling over in their cars to cry.
I like that you think that they made it this far.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so your listener, thank you for sticking with us, listener. So the whole thing with the Civil War is that people would get injured or like whatever, and then they would get amputated. Like the arm or a leg would get amputated because it wasn't the injuries that were killing them; it was the infections. It was brutal. And it turns out that's not just a human thing. Infections can be really scary for animals too, and specifically for ants. When they get injured, there's a real threat of death because of the secondary infection that they can get from the injury. I mean, honestly, for an ant, if it loses a leg, it doesn't really matter. But if it gets an infection, it dies. So what some researchers were... It's hard to know exactly how this all got started, but as far as I can tell, the researchers were, for fun, like injuring the legs of ants and looking to see what happened, how they like dealt with those injuries. And what they found, to their surprise, is that when they would injure the leg of an ant and then put it back in the colony, other ants would come over and start licking the injury, but then eventually they would just bite it off. They would start nibbling at the injury site, and then they would move their mouth down towards the like armpit, basically, and they would bite off the leg altogether. And then the ant would go about its merry business. And they were like, well, that's weird. So they did this big study where they tried injuring ants either on the proximal segment of the leg, like the upper leg, or the more distal part of the leg, the next one out. So one's called, I think, the femur, and one's called the tarsus or something like that. But anyway, the close one they would injure or the far one they would injure. And what they found is when the close one got injured, the ants would not remove it. But when the far one got injured, they would remove it.
Why
which was really
would they
weird.
do that?
Why would they do that? And then what they did is they went and they experimentally put bacteria into injuries of ants to see which
First
one was more
they're
deadly.
hurting the ants, and then they're putting not very nice.
I know. And they showed that if you get injured in the distal part, you're probably going to die from the infection. And if it's the proximal part, you're probably not going to die. And so the ants were basically only doing the amputation if it was going to save the other ant's life. And if it was an injury in a place where they didn't need to amputate, they wouldn't do it. So really like crazy, quite advanced medicine for these ants where they only did amputations where they needed to. It was really kind of cool.
So I'm assuming they did this with army ants, because if they did, maybe what they really learned is that ants have learned to organize armies like human beings. And that's what they've proved, because they're army ants. That seemed like a more apt, silly, you know.
I know. I wish it was army ants, but it wasn't. It was Florida carpenter ants.
Mm. Again, the whole army ants thing. It was kind of half baked in my head. If I had more time, I might have come up with something a little better.
The joke would have been on fire ants.
We are going to get to the story about tall ceilings and better or worse or something test results here with Dan Riskin, but that's coming soon. I'm teasing that ahead because we're still on animals, because there's a Meshuggah guy where there was a case report written up in the New England Journal of Medicine. That's out of New England. Not trying to brag. I understand how medicine works. This guy was stung in the eyeball by a bee. My worst nightmare.
Yeah, you have worse nightmares than that, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, but it's a bad one.
But I have better nightmares than this.
Yeah. It's definitely not something you want to have happen. So this guy goes to emergency in Philadelphia. He has a stinger in his eyeball. So they take it out of his eyeball, but 2 days later, it's worse than ever. His eye's even more bloodshot, and he can't see out of his eye. And so he goes to an ophthalmologist, which is a very hard word to spell, I realized while writing this one up. But anyway, thank goodness for spell check, because there's a lot of L's in that word that I didn't know about. And once he got to the ophthalmologist, the ophthalmologist found that there was still a little tiny barb sticking into his eyeball between the blue part and the white part, like just right next to his iris. And so they went in there with these really tiny tweezers that jewelers use and pulled the barb out, and he's fine. But it turns out, because as part of this, they went back and looked through all the medical literature for any cases of people getting stung in the eyeball, and it happens more than you would think. They found 50 different descriptions of people getting stung in the eyeball, and they said that for a lot of those, you can't tell if the trauma was the sting itself or the removal of the barbed stinger, which can actually really tear the eye. So be warned, if you get stung in the eyeball, maybe you should leave it in there. There's one guy in the 70s, he went to the doctor and he had a stinger that was still in his eye from the 1940s. For 28 years, this guy had a stinger in his eye.
Wow.
Yeah. A wasp stinger, no less.
Yeah, I'm like, I can't imagine a worse place to get stung. I really can't.
Well, so you can imagine being stung on the testicle. So would you rather be stung on the testicle or on the eyeball?
I think testicle.
Yeah, me too. I would rather be stung. I don't want to be stung on my testicle,
but
I think I would rather be stung in the testicle.
Can we rewind to this word ophthalmologist? O-P-H-T-H-A-L.
O-P-H-T-H.
Ophthalmologist. Ophthalmologist.
I feel like there's more L's in there. I swear to you, every time I think I know how to spell it, I type it, and then the little red line underneath appears, and it says, no, you don't know how to spell it, you idiot. So, and I go, but I do, and it says, no, you're an idiot.
Ophthalmologists are eye doctors, whereas optometrists are eye specialists. Don't go to medical school.
Right.
By all means, we should be going to ophthalmologists. They go to more school, they learn more, they're more qualified to do more surgeries. But I do wonder, a lot of us go to optometrists. Do we do that because it's easier to pronounce? Maybe. Might be.
It's easier to read off the sign. I think optometrists spend more time like really learning how to get you into the right glasses, whereas ophthalmologists are more about pulling stingers out of your eyeballs. So I guess it depends whether you have the stinger. If a stinger is in your testicle, go get your glasses at the optometrist. If the stinger's in your eyeball, go to the ophthalmologist.
Got it. I don't know why you're so fixated on the stinger in the testicle. Usually that's my role. I'm the one who's fixated on the metaphorical stinger in the testicle on the show.
It's just that they inject venom, right? So there's like this whole thing, like it would really hurt. Like you're really rolling the dice as to which one would hurt more. I think the eye would be bad, but I do think the eye would be worse. Because the eye, you really need your eye to work. I mean, if you lost a nut, you'd be okay. Right?
Yeah.
You got two.
I got a friend who's got a prosthetic. He had testicular cancer. I haven't seen the prosthetic. I have asked.
He won't show it to you? I feel like that's just courtesy. He should.
I want to see it.
Yeah, it's like a peg leg. You want to see it.
I want to see it.
Is it made of wood?
No.
Is it made of wood?
I didn't ask to touch it, but now I'm thinking maybe I'd like to touch it too.
Knock on it and listen to see try to guess if it's hollow.
All right, that's my homework for...
If they were both hollow, every time you ran, you hear this. It would sound like the coconuts from Monty Python.
When we come back, you might have some rich, fancy friends who just bought a house. Maybe it's a condo, and they say, it's got 14-foot ceilings. And now you can say, well, maybe your kids are going to be dumb. Maybe that's a stretch from this story. But
no, I like it.
There's recent findings about high ceilings causing university students to maybe not do so well on exams. Little stumble there.
Or to talk into microphones.
Now I have to leave it in.
I always do that.
I just feel disingenuous when I make a mistake and then there's some interaction, either cutting it all out. We're here with Dan Riskin. We'll be back in a moment.
I know.
We are here with Mr. Gigglesworth. It's just hot. I think it's the heat.
It's the heat. It makes us dumber.
Well,
it makes us dumber.
Makes you dumber. Just keeps me regular. Dan Riskin, man of science, here to talk science on the Science Appliance.
If you haven't listened, listener, to the last segment where we got into the coconut testicles, I really think you should get back there. It was very funny. I had a great time.
Why wouldn't they have made it there? Because they'd have to be there to get to hear.
I guess you heard it, listener. But tease this episode with what I just said.
Oh, God.
Because, listener, coming up, testicle talk with the coconuts. It's really good.
Except we already talked about it, but now you want me to put this at the beginning.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, just put this, just tease, like a little clip, on this episode, and then you play that.
So people hear this having, you already said it, but you knowing that it will come because it's in the past.
Yeah.
And then you want me to take all of this and put it in the beginning, including what I'm saying now.
Yep.
Great radio. All right, high ceilings. This one's wild to me because I always liked writing exams in the old, beautiful hall. I went to University of Toronto, and there's all these gorgeous old buildings. Some of them have wonderful high ceilings, and some of them are newer buildings that are like you're packed in like sardines. It's like, it's a horrible building with low ceilings, and what's that kind of drop ceiling where they cover it with those weird panels that are like chipboard, and they got the horrible fluorescent lights, and then you get these wonderful old halls that are 200 years old or however old they are. I always liked writing exams with high ceilings, beautiful architecture, but maybe that's why I did so bad in undergrad. Maybe that's why D is truly for degree, Dan.
Do you think you like the space? Do you think you liked, for me, it was the ritual of going in for like an exam against all those other people, right? Like you go into this space and you're in physics 200 or whatever. So you're sitting in rows 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and English is in rows 2, 4, 6. So there's no way for you to look at the row next to you and copy their answers. And then each of you has like alternating tests or your whatever. So the person behind you isn't taking the same test as you are, and the person in front of you isn't. So you can't cheat off of them. Like it's all set up in this way. And there's like hundreds of people in the same space. And everybody's like taking their test at the same time. And everybody's quiet. Everybody's stressed. Everybody has the same HB pencils. I love it. I love the ritual of that.
I liked it too, because I wasn't great at doing my homework, but I was okay at writing tests, because I would often just show up at class and listen, because I'm like, well, if I don't do that, I'm going to fail. So I did like exams, especially mathy kind of exams. You get the little bump on your finger, because I always push too hard with the pencil. When you're by the 7th or 8th exam, I had a weird callus on where the pencil hits the finger kind of thing. Yeah, I liked exams. And then Scantron cards, you shade them in. Oh, yeah,
Scantron. And then when you get up and you're finished, and you sit there for a minute, and you're like, I'm finished, but I'm not going to take it up there. I'm just going to soak this in for a second. I'm going to stretch my back a little bit. Then I'm going to get up. Now I'm going to strut up, because a lot of people are looking at me, because people are like not done, and they're like, he's finished already. And then you're walking up there, and people are looking at you, and you hand it in, and then the TA gives you the old, oh, nice job. Thank you very much. And you're like, okay. And then you walk out of there, and you're free. You did it. You're done.
Yeah. The answer is yes.
Yeah. Well, this new study shows that we're both idiots, because those big spaces apparently lower your grades. There is a lab in Australia where they study how the space you're in affects your stress. And most of the research has been done using VR goggles, where they can experimentally change the dimensions of a room or the colors of a room really easily and measure your stress levels. But they said, based on what we've done, we think that a big, huge space should increase stress. So is it true if so, we should expect that people do worse on exams in a bigger room. So they went back through a decade of psychology final grades at that university across 3 different campuses and I think 11 rooms. And they just did a correlation. Well, it was a more complex model than that. They had a bunch of other factors in there. But overall, they showed that there is this correlation between high ceilings and poorer grades. But what was frustrating to me is that the paper did not say, like, if the ceiling is 20 feet higher, you're going to get 1% lower grade or something like that. Like, that's what I wanted. So I emailed the person who wrote the paper and I asked for that. And they said, we can't really give you that. That doesn't really come out of the statistical model in a way that you can interpret it that way. So I guess we just don't, I mean, just know that it's worse, but I can't tell you if it's 5% worse, 0.001% worse or what.
Okay. At first I heard VR, like, aren't you just testing for that experience using VR goggles? But I guess they corrected for it by looking at actual exams written with high ceilings and low ceilings.
Yeah. It was actual performance on historical grades or historical classes. Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk puppies. See,
puppies.
Yeah, puppies.
Yeah,
I got a cat and he drives me nuts. He's so needy. He's so cuddly, so friendly, and he's too much of these things. I love him, but he's more work than I thought. I don't know if this relates to the story at all. I just wanted to talk about my cat, but...
Yeah, you're a cat person.
Yeah.
You really do. You do. I mean, you have had a dog before, right?
No.
Have you ever met a dog? Have you ever hung out with a dog? Have you ever... When a dog approaches you, do you pet the dog or do you just kind of look at it and go, mm-hmm?
Shortly after my divorce, when I was imbibing with illegal substances and alcohol... Again, that never happened because I would never admit to breaking laws. That's for parody purposes. But I was unwell after my divorce and I had a slight mental breakdown. I somehow booked a flight and ended up at my brother's house without really remembering. I was in a fugue state crying. It was a bad scene. It was over 10 years ago. Don't worry about it. I'm fine now.
Good.
I went to his house and he had just got a dog. And as I was...
Puppy?
Maybe a year old at the time. So yeah.
Oh, okay.
A white German Shepherd. Okay?
Mm.
You know, weird breed, gotta say.
Mm-hmm. That is weird.
I never liked dogs, never grew up with them. I'm having a mental breakdown. I'm crying on the couch. I'm saying all these things that don't make sense. And my brother's just concerned for me. And his dog just comes, sits next to me and rests his paw on me.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I get it now. I get why people love their animals.
Yeah. Dogs do that. That's a real thing. I mean, cats, listen, I'll let cat owners talk about what cats do because it's easy to make fun of cats because they're often indifferent. But dogs, like, I can tell you that when we got our puppy, Freya, who is now 2 years old, but for that first year, she was just the worst animal. Like, she was biting people, like, not biting aggressively, but playing constantly. Like, I would try to walk across the room and she would bite my feet, and I have holes in all my socks from where she bit my feet because she would try to herd me back into the living room. She was just obsessed with everybody, and it was so much work. And my wife and I were both just like beside ourselves, and we knew we couldn't get rid of the dog because we didn't want to really, and also the kids would kill us. But we were just like, this is too much. Like, this dog is too crazy. But then you'd have a day where, like, one of your kids is having, like, just, you know, an emotional day or whatever, and you're trying to, like, get through to your kid, and you're trying to help your kid, and they're just melting down, and you just can't. And then you look over, and the kid is, like, just lying on the dog, just completely face first into fur, and just hugging the dog. And the dog is just totally fine. And you're like, oh, yeah, this animal is not for me. This is like the family dog is for the kids. Like, this dog, and our dog does take care of the mental health of everybody in this house. So now she's great. But when we had her as a puppy, she was terrible. Terrible. And so this study that just came out validates that. It shows that a lot of people do feel a regret when they get a puppy. There's a lot of stress involved with it, most notably exhaustion. There's also a lot of frustration and a lot of anxiety. And so they polled a whole bunch of people about their negative feelings around having puppies. Then they asked like 1,800 dog owners about whether they fall anywhere on this scale and about these different things. And they found that, yeah, it's really widespread for people to get what's called the puppy blues. And the puppy blues was like, it was a thing that everybody was talking about in the social media literature, or in the social media, but not in the scientific literature. So anyway, now it's a real thing. It's in the scientific literature. And if you have the puppy blues, you can feel validated that it is a real thing. But the good news is they grow up and they become easier to deal with. And you forget how brutal it was. When people answered the survey, the longer it was since they had a puppy, the nicer they thought the puppy experience was. And the more recent it was, the more brutal it was.
I was watching something about how negative experiences that end kind of good, your memory will remember them as way better than just negative experiences. So, like,
is that the prostate exam thing? Have you heard about the prostate exam study thing?
Maybe. This was like a specific experiment where they caused people pain, but then the pain lowered towards the end of the experiment. Or they just caused them pain. Right. And so if you do 10 minutes of pain followed by 10 minutes of decreasing pain, even though it's more pain than just 10 minutes of pain. Are you with me? So experiment 1 is 10 minutes of pain. Experiment 2 is 10 minutes of pain followed by 10 minutes of less pain. So maybe like it's a really hot sensation, you're burning, and then the last 10 minutes it gradually goes to warm. You'll remember the longer one as better than the short one, even though it's more pain. Just because at the end things get better, and your memory kind of is a fickle thing, and you're like, well, that wasn't so bad.
I hadn't thought about puppies that way. That is exactly the finding from the prostate exam thing. So the prostate exam thing is they're poking around in your bum, and it's very uncomfortable. But then what they do is they leave the tools in there for 1 minute.
We started with the bums. We're ending with the bums. Go on.
They leave the tools in there, but they don't do anything for 1 minute, and then they take them out. And then, so the last minute is what sort of is that decreasing pain thing. Like, it's not uncomfortable at all. They just have those tools in there. Well, it's uncomfortable, but it's not like the before. And people remember it much, the whole experience, even though it's adding a minute of bum time to the experiment or to the experience. People remember it more fondly. So that's the so I guess the message is, if your puppy's driving you crazy, just put something in your bum for 1 minute, and you should be fine.
Or if you're really old and your time is kind of up, just spend all your money to have a wonderful last month. And then you'll be like, my life was amazing.
I guess
you shouldn't spend any of your money, live horribly just to save up for your last month, And
then the last month. Yeah, but then, your memory of it. I guess everybody else remembers it more fondly because you're dead in that scenario.
So are you. Taking you down with me.
This is a big month.
Why
what you're spending your money on.
Why I'm threatening you, I don't know. Because you have graced the show with your presence, Dan Riskin, and I appreciate your time, and I wish you well on your trip to Antigua, or however you pronounce that word.
Caligula.
It's a wild movie. Dan, thank you. What a pleasure.
Oh, the pleasure was mine. This was a great one. Highlight reel for me. This was good.
Okay. All right, we're going to take a serious turn now. There is a startling and rather interesting piece in the Toronto Star. It is written by late Nobel laureate Alice Munro's daughter. That daughter is Andrea Robin Skinner. Andrea has spoken out in print about childhood sexual abuse by her stepfather, Alice Munro's husband. Gary Direnfeld and I are going to pick this one apart and discuss childhood sexual abuse. It's Therapy Thursdays on a Wednesday, and things are about to get rather serious. My hope is this will be informative for you. It is Therapy Thursdays on a Wednesday with therapist, social worker, and man who I happen to like very much, Gary Direnfeld. You can find out more about him at yoursocialworker.com. He's available for hire. Gary, please help me. Please, can I hire you? I need you. I just spent a week with my family on vacation. I need you more than ever. Yeah, it was a lot.
That's brave.
I know. No, it wasn't that bad. You know what? We're all like, I'm the youngest and I'm 38, so it's civil. Not
Good.
Important. How you doing?
I am tired. I'm renovating our kitchen, and I do the work myself. So I've demolished everything, pulled out the cabinets, the flooring. So I'm tired. But otherwise, I'm okay.
You described a horrific scene when you went to break open your drywall for the purposes of renovation, demolition, who knows what. You were expecting to see some insulation, hopefully not mold, but nothing out of the ordinary. And what did you find in your walls?
Ants. Plenty of black little ants and their larvae. It's like the wall was humming with ants. They were in the insulation, and it's hard not to be grossed out by that. I ran out and I bought some killer ant spray, very effective stuff. I administered that. I waited. I pulled out the insulation. Everything was dead, thank God. Pulled out the insulation, sprayed again just in case, and then I put spray foam insulation, that expanding stuff that'll take up all the space and hopefully all the nooks and crannies where an ant can get through.
I got an ant story. I was living in San Francisco, and these brown Argentinian ants, which form super colonies. Most ants, at least when two colonies abut each other, they go to all-out war. So they have kind of like it's a regulating mechanism where if there's just way too many of them, they go to war and then they, you know, a lot of them die and they kind of like have their own colonies. Argentinian ants, not only are they invasive, but if there's a colony next door, they start cooperating.
Oh my God.
I had them in my apartment. They had taken root in the base of my favorite plant, and I didn't really want to say anything to Miranda. She would see ants every now and again, but I knew there was a big problem. And I was 26. I wasn't putting my laundry in the hamper. So I threw my jeans on the ground one day and I went to work. And out from my jeans onto my shirt crawled an ant. I had literal ants in my pants, Gary. But then I got those traps where it's awful. You feed them poison. They swarm the poison because it's like sweet or sugary. They think it's food, and then they take the poison back to their colony, and then they feed it to their queen and whatnot. I got rid of them, you know?
Well, you know what? That's what we originally did when we saw the odd ant in the kitchen. I put out those kind of ant traps that, they'll take the bait, they'll take it back to the colony. And here I am, you know, now pulling out the walls a month or so later, and it's like, holy mackerel, they must have treated that stuff like a snack. Because they're just going gangbusters.
And they're smart, you know. I think they quarantine off their sick, which is wild. And in the Amazon, there is a fungus called cordyceps that infects the larger ants, like the real Amazonian rainforest ants. These aren't tiny little house ants.
Right, the walk away with you ant.
Yeah, they're like an inch big, you know, or half an inch big. Bullet ants or whatever. Anyway, these funguses, they infect the ant, and they infect the ant's brain. This is what that show, The Last of Us, is based on. It's a fungus that infects the ant's brain, turns them into zombies. The ants only want to get to the highest point. It changes their brain chemistry so that all they want to do is climb trees to the highest possible point where they succumb to the fungus. The fungus blooms from the carcass, and because it's high, the spores go everywhere and can infect other ants. But
sounds like LSD or psilocybin.
It's crazy, but the ants, they'll send a sacrificial ant to grab the zombie ant, sacrifice its own life, and just go as far away from the colony as possible. They cooperate. So I'm thinking, you know, they realize it's poison. They quarantine off the ones who've eaten it and go about their merry way and don't go near that place anymore.
I just hope that I've rid myself of the infestation forever. We'll see.
If aliens come to Earth, and they ask the question, who's in charge here? And they go by simple biomass. Ants by weight are the heaviest things on Earth. Like the number of the pound per pound, species by species, ants rule the Earth.
Why do you know all this stuff about ants, for crying out loud? Of all the things that have such a depth of knowledge, where does this come from, David?
Ants were in my pants, Gary. I became obsessed with ants because they are fascinating creatures.
Clearly.
I don't find them that gross. Like, you know, they don't scare me. I think they're really cool. And
they didn't scare me, but yeah, gross. I don't want them in or near my food.
Anyway,
I'm not sharing.
I'd rather an ant in my food than a cockroach or a maggot. You know, ants, they're clean. And I was talking to ants, talking about ants earlier in the show with scientist Dan Riskin, and he was saying, yeah. And he was saying how, I mean, we were just talking nonsense most of the time. We got to maybe 1 minute of science with 10 minutes of talking. But that's how it goes with me. He was saying that when ants injure their limbs, rather than succumb to infection, other ants will amputate the limbs of their peers to avoid them getting like ant gangrene, basically. So they're like little mini surgeons, you know? They're amazing creatures.
Well, you know, let's face it. Apparently, when we are long gone, and I don't mean you and me personally, I mean the human race, it'll be the ants and the cockroaches.
The ants will win. They'll figure out a way. Cockroaches are bigger, but ants are more scrappy and resourceful. They carry like 3 times their body weight. They form little supply lines to their colony when they find food. They're amazing. I mean, they're amazing creatures. And you killed how many of them?
Hundreds. And I did so gleefully, just to be clear.
Well, they might be coming for you. You know, if
and in my wife's eyes, I'm a hero.
I don't believe in the afterlife. And even if I did, I don't think ants would rule it. But if you get to the afterlife and the ants are in charge, Jerry.
They're gonna be all over me.
Yeah, you're not. You're going straight to hell. Okay. All jokes aside, I did want to talk about something rather serious today. A startling piece in the Toronto Star
Yeah.
having to do with late Nobel laureate Alice Munro, the writer. Her daughter, Andrea Robin Skinner, has spoken out rather loudly, rather detailed, about sexual abuse by her stepfather, that is Alice Munro's husband, that went on all throughout this woman's childhood, and she is voicing her story. We don't necessarily need to get into the specifics of that, although we can, but I wanted to tackle a rather difficult, serious topic with you today.
Yeah.
Childhood sexual abuse. And I was hoping you'd take the lead, because I'm sure I have lots to add, but I know that you have worked with this, you understand this, and it's a topic that needs to be treated seriously, a topic that needs to be spoken about with care, and I couldn't think of anyone I'd rather discuss this with than you.
Thanks, David. Childhood sexual abuse. It's actually a very nuanced topic. There's no one way, if you will, to speak about it, and there isn't just one kind of experience of it. Andrea spoke of being molested and invited, in a sense, to molestation by her stepfather. I think around age 9, it started during summer access visits, because she typically lived with her dad, several provinces away. So there she is, and stepfather kind of comes on to her, making lurid suggestions and exposing himself, and it's not something that she wants. She eventually lets go the secret, and as the secret winds back to her mother, the mother doesn't really want to address it or do anything to confront her husband. And in fact, she says, "I love this guy," and it's even a kind of misogyny. Why should a woman go without the love of her husband because this has transpired? What a cognitive distortion.
Yeah,
that is.
The author said that misogynistic culture was to blame. If she was expected to leave her husband over this, expected to sacrifice her needs, the needs of her children, for her to make up for the failings of men. That's a wild interpretation of misogynistic culture, but I just...
Bizarre.
To me, it just shows the roots of this problem. It's not just the abuse, and it is the abuse. I mean, that's the big thing, but it's the family silence. It's family being complicit.
It speaks to the nuances, David, that, best case scenario, when a child comes forward, the non-offending parent believes it and addresses it. Even in the context of parental separation, there, you may see an increase in these kinds of allegations, where those allegations are against the father. The fathers would like to say that it's all false allegations, but statistically, that doesn't hold true. That, even in the context of parental separation, where there's an allegation of sexual abuse perpetrated by the dad, more often than not, way more often than not, those allegations hold water. But, not, as we see here, not always does the non-offender support the child. And again, that's part of the nuances. We do want, and then there's another aspect for some kids, because some kids grow up not feeling totally cared for. They're emotionally vulnerable. And then along comes someone purporting to love them, who uses that love to exploit the vulnerability and then to come on sexually. That's a very confusing kind of sexual abuse for many children, even into adolescence, because it isn't coercive. It isn't violent. It's definitely secret, but it can feel special. And as that child ages, they then wonder, were they complicit in their own sexual abuse? Because to some degree, they may have actually enjoyed the attention aspect of it.
We're here with Gary Direnfeld talking about the piece in the Toronto Star. Late Nobel laureate Alice Munro's daughter has spoken out against sexual abuse by her stepfather. We'll discuss this further in a moment. We are here with Gary Direnfeld. It is Therapy Thursdays on a Wednesday. We're talking rather serious topic, childhood sexual abuse, based on this piece in the Toronto Star. The late Nobel laureate Alice Munro's daughter, Andrea Robin Skinner, has spoken out against her stepfather and her mother, Alice Munro. I guess the mother was
protecting the father. Just follow that through, David. She was protecting her spouse, not her daughter who had been sexually abused.
Precisely. So family silence. I think this is a major part for me of the problem here. You'd like to think in a perfect world, you have a predator, you have a minor, and the minor speaks out, gets the courage to speak out, and the problem gets addressed. You know, the damage is done, but
you would think that would be a slam dunk, wouldn't you? But it's not always the case. There can be such a sense of family shame, embarrassment, fear for what happens to the perpetrator. Might the perpetrator face jail time? Might they lose their job? What if the perpetrator is the sole breadwinner of the family? So we can't minimize all the implications, but nor should we ever discount or disregard the impact on the sexual abuse victim, hopefully come survivor. And, you know, these are issues where hopefully family rallies around the victim, even in the case of incest, where you know, it's a familial perpetrator. These are the nuances, David, that people are navigating once the disclosure is made or once the secret is let out.
And it gets even uglier. In the article, Andrea says that her abuser told her mother she would kill the daughter if she went to police. She blamed the daughter for the abuse. He described a 9-year-old as a homewrecker. And I know it happens, but it's so boggling to me that a family can let that go on and just fall silent. You know?
And so there is the sexual abuse, and then there is the psychological abuse, the remarkable distorting of information, of facts, the manipulation, the holding the child accountable for the adult misdeeds, the adult criminal deeds. It is such a bastardization of reality that is more often than not impossible for the child to fully navigate. And that ties them into knots. It consumes them. And, you know, as we see through reading Andrea's essay, it grossly affects her teenage and adult life, where she suffers tremendous mental health and psychological issues.
So I'm not a social worker. I'm not a therapist. I've been to a lot of therapy. And I think for me, the thing I think about when I read a story like this is, how do you even begin to treat a patient who's a survivor of this, or even the family members who've observed it? Like, how do you even begin? I mean, that for me is the hardest thing. Where would you even begin?
Well, hopefully you find a therapist who is sensitive, has their own act together, and is knowledgeable and experienced and trained in the area of sexual abuse. So you have to be very specific. It does take training, knowledge, and expertise. And, you know, what some survivors worry about is, will the therapist be judgmental of them the way perhaps the parents or the perpetrator or siblings or other friends may have been? So if you're calling around looking for a therapist, you can dip your toe in the water by saying, I need to discuss issues of my childhood abuse. Is this something that you do? Do you do it often? Do you have a particular approach? Because we want that person to feel safe in their disclosure. We want to provide that place where we're going to receive their information non-judgmentally. If you are a novice therapist, to hear firsthand some of these stories from abuse survivors, it can be overwhelming for the therapist. And then the person coming for therapy, that's a concern of theirs. Will I overwhelm my therapist?
You don't want to be treating your therapist. You don't want to be saying,
exactly.
"Oh, are you okay?" to my therapist when you're sharing something like this.
Exactly. So, when people come to me, it's a routine question of mine. Have you ever been touched in a way that's made you feel uncomfortable? So I open up the dialogue freely, easily, straightforwardly. And it is amazing for how many persons I am their first safe place for disclosure, and they disclose.
I ask you the question, how do you even begin to treat or help people who've been through something like this? The first thing you said is therapists need to be non-judgmental. To me, that's a given. The opposite of that for me, and correct me if I'm wrong, would be victim blaming. And I think victim blaming is something that comes up in Andrea's story, the one we're talking about.
Yes.
It can rear its ugly head in all kinds of places. You're saying it could even rear its ugly head in therapy in worst, awful cases.
Inadvertently, it can. And so that's why you want to make sure whoever you're meeting with has some expertise and experience, training. I wrote a brief piece about childhood sexual abuse on my Facebook page today. You aren't there for the therapist is there for you. And you have to feel comfortable with who you're meeting with.
Tell me about victim blaming, though. Like, how would you define it? How can it affect the healing process? What can you do to combat it?
So, it's, first of all, it's far more common than you realize. We wonder, was this child sexualized? Did the child exhibit any sexual behavior on their own? Notice I'm talking using gender neutral language because males can be sexually molested and abused as well as girls. So that can happen regardless of gender. But in terms of the victim blaming, there can be the wonder, were you complicit? Did you do something? Did you come on to somebody? Were you dressed provocatively? Yada, yada, yada. I just want people to know that there is no way for a child to be complicit in their own sexual abuse. There's just no way. If a child is that needy of attention and they expose themselves to me thinking that will draw me to them, I'm not going to exploit that.
No, it's insane.
I'm the adult here.
I was running around naked half my childhood. It's insane. It's an insane thing to think that a child could welcome this.
And I'm going to say to that child, cover yourself up, little one. This is inappropriate. When you're covered, we're going to have a discussion about this. Why do you think you need to do that? But there are those who would exploit that, causing the child to feel that they're responsible. No, the child's never responsible, even if that is part of the scenario. And why the child isn't responsible is because that is a vulnerable child, not fully capable of understanding the very behaviors they're engaged in. And why is this child so emotionally needy and vulnerable that they think that this might garner some love, attention, and affection? So it is never, ever, for whatever is going on, it's just, it can't be the child's fault. And I want listeners to know that to their core, because many do struggle with that. So when you come to therapy, it's often a reorienting, rethinking about these experiences, putting them into perspective, learning that you were transgressed against oftentimes, all times, beyond the awareness of what was really transpiring. You were there as a tool for the gratification of someone older than yourself. There's no way you could have been complicit.
Absolutely not. And I've got an example that I think, because we're talking about children, which can be such a jarring subject. I find myself struggling with what to say, what to ask, because it's so jarring and so upsetting. But I've got an example in terms of victim blaming that I think anyone can relate to, and I'll share that in just a moment. We're here talking about the piece in the Toronto Star. Alice Munro's daughter, Andrea Robin Skinner, has spoken out against childhood sexual abuse, and Gary Direnfeld and I are discussing it. We are back, Therapy Thursdays on a Wednesday. Gary, welcome to you.
This is a heavy topic today.
It is.
Sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse. And should that child at some point disclose? How is that met by the parents, by the family? You know, we differentiate between extrafamilial and intrafamilial. Extrafamilial sexual abuse, it's done by someone outside of the family. And it's often easier for the family to rally around the person who's been victimized by extrafamilial sexual abuse. We said, that person, it's outside the family, it's that person over there. We're all going to band together, get angry at that person. When it's intrafamilial sexual abuse, that could mean brother, sibling, aunt, uncle, grandparent, parent. And that has huge implications for how it's going to be handled, whether or not that parent is a breadwinner, the relationship between the parents, the shame, the embarrassment that the family may endure the result of that exposure. So it can be far more difficult for the family to rally around the victim of intrafamilial sexual abuse. And that's more of what we're talking about today.
Okay. Well, I want to rewind to what we were talking about just before we took a break there.
Sure.
You were saying that a child cannot be blamed, cannot be complicit in abuse. To me, that's so obvious, but I'm glad you said it because it just needs to be repeated over and over. And an example that brings it more into kind of my world, more into, I think, something anyone can relate to had they not had any experience dealing with survivors of this, being victims of this, whatever. Like, you can't welcome sexual violence as an adult woman based on what you're dressed as. Like, it is just not possible.
Correct.
It's as simple as that. And there's certain ways in which, like, there's no world where violence, abuse is welcomed no matter your behavior. And this is just such an obvious one. And that was the example I wanted to give.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, you said, how do people deal with this? Well, coming forward, meeting with the counselor and blurting it out. Hopefully, like myself, I'm a counselor that invites the discussion because as just part of the general questions that I asked as mentioned, you know, have you ever been touched in a way that's made you feel uncomfortable? And David, people cannot not communicate. So even if their lips don't move, you'll see a change in body posture. And that gives you something to explore. I see that you're sitting a little differently, perhaps uncomfortably. Did I touch on a nerve? I want you to know that I'm comfortable discussing this. And it may be something that you may feel better about discussing as well. So I make the invitation. I create, hopefully, a safe space. And then as the person discloses and they experience the non-judgmentalness and the listening ear, for the first time, there can be a sense of relaxation. Oh my God, I can finally speak this and own my truth, own my experience. And that's where healing begins. It's a long journey, don't get me wrong. It's a long journey, but that's often a first step.
Well, say more about the journey. If the first step is saying the words in a non-judgmental environment, acknowledging it when you may have been made to feel when you were younger like it didn't happen.
You ever have a boil? You ever have a boil on your skin, like a huge pimple that is coming to a head? And, you know, it hurts. You put hot compresses on it and finally it kind of bursts. And then there's relief.
No, I've never lanced a boil, Gary, but please continue with this horrible example.
I used to have zits. So kind of the same thing on my face. But there is a sense of relief, letting the pressure of the sexual abuse, letting that pressure go. There's a sense of relief. But then comes, you know, is this something I need to do something about? Do I need to confront the perpetrator? And if so, how so? So this isn't something for the therapist to decide. This is something for you to discuss and work through with the therapist so that you can, in that safe place, take all the time you need to process what has transpired and to process what do you want to do with this? What if the perpetrator is still in your life? How do you want to deal with that? How do you, because there will be fallout if there hasn't been a disclosure already to the family. How do you want to deal with that or not? That's your discretion. I should mention where the therapist does not have discretion is where there's a disclosure of childhood sexual abuse and that person is still a child. We are mandated to report to a child protection agency. We don't have a choice in that. That is enshrined in law. And that is for the protection of that young person. Having been in those circumstances, when I do disclose, whoever has shared with me the story, I try to disclose with that person joining me. So I say, let's do this together so that you'll know exactly what I have to say. And we can both work with the intake worker with the child protection agency. And so I can support that discussion with them. And you will hear firsthand how they're going to respond to this. So there can be a tremendous sense of hand-holding if you're discussing a current situation involving a minor.
So you talk about how it's enshrined in law, like if there's current ongoing abuse, it needs to be disclosed to the proper authorities. What about when the abuse comes to light many years later? Like I come to see a therapist 30 years later. Are there legal measures or anything that can be done at that point?
There isn't an onus on the therapist to disclose that to anyone, including police. That will now be up to you as the victim of that experience. And that is something to discuss with the therapist. Should you choose to disclose, what are some of the ramifications of that from a police or criminal perspective? And is that something you want to explore and something you want to go through? What I like doing with people that I work with is getting what I call non-disclosing consultations. So I'll say, let me phone the police. Let me describe the situation to the police. You can be present for that conversation, but remain silent, or you can speak, use your voice, but not give your name. And we can have a discussion with the police and see, just like I would with a child protection agency, see what they would do with that. So again, the therapist can support you very directly through that kind of process to see what you want to do and how you want to deal with this.
I was worried you're not a lawyer, and so I shouldn't have asked the question, what can be done many years later? But I love that, and I didn't actually know that. I think it's a really interesting answer, which is, I assume every case is different.
Yes.
When it happened, the circumstances, are these people still alive? Do they still have access to children? Whatever those circumstances are, I had no idea you could just call a law enforcement agency with a therapist. You don't give the name, but you say, here's the circumstances. What can be done?
It's a non-disclosing consultation. And, it's rare that I've done that with police, really rare, but it is certainly far more common for me to do that with child protective services, children's aid societies here in Ontario.
Interesting. I just never knew from that. And I'm glad I asked, because now I do.
Yeah. And as a result, I've had circumstances where the Child Protection Agency has said, this is something we need to investigate. And so I'm hoping that you're going to give me the client's contact information. And, my neck is on the line because they know that it's me calling looking for this. And now if I don't disclose, I can be held liable with my regulatory body. So I explain these risks to the parent before we call.
Understood.
So that they understand what's going on. And I make it clear that either way, I am calling because I have to. I have to. The question isn't if, the question is how. But I've also had circumstances where the children's aid not in childhood sexual abuse, but in other matters where the Children's Aid has said, well, the family is working with you voluntarily, Gary. Yes, they are. Are they doing this? Yes. Are they safeguarding children from, the violence in the home or the parental dispute? Or I said, yes, they are. And I'm continuing to monitor. They said, well, look, in the end of the day, we would want them to be in counseling and in treatment. They're already there. And so the safeguards are in place. You're monitoring to this. No, we don't need to investigate. So those things can go, any of a number of ways. Coming back to the, childhood sexual abuse, there are many people who carry the wounds, the scars, the mental health issues, serious mental health issues, where it affects their lives tremendously, up to and including suicidal thought and even suicidal behavior, drug and alcohol use and abuse to deal with the feelings. So this is not something to be taken lightly, and we do want people to get help for themselves if this is what they are facing.
Gary, thank you for having this conversation with me on a rather difficult topic today.
My pleasure, David. Hopefully it's of value to some of our listeners.
Gary Direnfeld is a therapist, a social worker. You can find out more about him at yoursocialworker.com. Coming up next, the Earth's inner core. It has slowed down in its rotation so much, it is moving backwards. Scientists have confirmed this, and here's what it means for the Earth's magnetic field. The thing that protects us from lethal cosmic rays and keeps compasses spinning. This one's interesting, and you're not going to want to miss it. The Earth's inner core is rotating, but that rotation has slowed so much, it's going the other way around. We're going to dive into what that means. We're here with Professor Jonathan Mound, who is a professor of global geophysics at the University of Leeds. John, thanks for talking with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I guess let's talk the Earth's core. Before these findings, before the slowing and maybe reversing of its rotation, why is the Earth's core and its rotation important to us? Why is it significant to us? Is there anything like in our daily life where the Earth's core is kind of important and we don't even know it?
So I get the main thing about the Earth's core is that it's the place where we generate the planetary magnetic field, which has lots of uses from navigation to protecting us from harmful space weather.
Cool. We're talking cosmic rays sort of infecting us with cancers and all that kind of stuff.
Maybe not quite that extreme, but solar winds coming from the sun, impacting them. So give us things like the Northern Lights, and we had a big solar storm back in the spring that a lot of people saw aurora that in places normally wouldn't see. And those sort of arise due to the interaction between those charged particles from the sun, the Earth's magnetic field, and its atmosphere. And without the magnetic field, more charged particles would be hitting the atmosphere all of the time. I guess there'd be more aurora, but also things like there would be more impact on people on transatlantic flights getting more solar radiation exposure, that sort of thing.
Cool. Yeah, I've heard pilots and people who spend a lot of time way up high are more likely to get, develop cancers and these kinds of things from...
Yeah. So they get more charged particle radiation. Yeah.
Highly charged cosmic rays. That's a good name for a band, actually, but that's not what we're going to discuss today. So how do scientists determine the speed and direction of the Earth's core? Like, you can't just go down there and start swimming in it.
No, it's about 2,900 kilometers of solid rock between us and the core. So it's all sort of indirect observations. And the main tools are either by studying the magnetic field and how it's changing, or seismology. Those are the two and they're both indirect ways. And so to get an idea of what's going on, I guess, both with the outer core and the inner core, because the core has these sort of two regions. There's the liquid outer core, and then there's the solid inner core. And the new study that involves that solid inner core and what it's doing.
Got it. So let's talk the inner core. I would think that it would just be rotating at the same speed of the Earth. I'm an idiot. That's obviously not true. How is it rotating, and what sort of speed is it at, or have we historically marked it as at?
So, it is basically rotating at the same speed as the rest of the Earth. The whole Earth rotates together 24 hours, once every 24 hours. Basically all it goes, but there's the different parts. So the atmosphere, because it's not entirely attached to the solid Earth, can go a little bit faster, a little bit slower on average. The outer core, because it's liquid, it can go a little bit faster, a little bit slower on average. And then the inner core, because it's not physically attached to the solid planet, can go a little bit faster, a little bit slower as it goes around. And so the differences in the rotation that we're talking about are actually very tiny differences from that 24-hour average speed. And so the whole Earth goes around in 24 hours. Sometimes the inner core goes around a little bit faster. Sometimes the inner core goes around a little bit slower. And so it's not that the inner core is going like the absolute opposite way. It's just relative to the rest of the Earth, it's slowed down. And so we're pulling ahead. So relatively speaking, it's going backwards. But of course, the whole thing is still going around about once every 24 hours.
I haven't seen the triple-blind academic scholarly publishing that proves that the day is 24 hours, but let's just suspend our disbelief. That was a terrible joke. Okay, so it has been reported that the inner core has slowed so much that it's moving backward, or I guess that just means slightly less slow than the Earth.
So it's backwards relative to the rest of the planet. It's sort of like if you've got two cars going on the highway, you're both going forward. But if I'm going faster than you, from my point of view, it looks like you're going backwards. But from your point of view, it just looks like I'm going forwards a little bit faster, right? And so it's a differential rotation.
Excellent. That's the word I'm looking for. Differential rotation. I'm going to say that and sound smart in every interview I do today. What is the implication of this? Is there any change? Are we going to observe any changes in the magnetic field? Any changes in cosmic rays? Or all my compasses are going to start spinning around like in a sci-fi movie?
Your compasses are safe. Probably there's no change in concentration. It's one of these things where it's an amazing thing that we can work out what's going on, but the actual implications are probably pretty small, right? We're talking the change in how fast the inner core is rotating is not very much. But if the inner core is slowing down, we sort of have to conserve energy overall. So somewhere else must be speeding up. And so it could be that the outer core is speeding up, or it could be that the mantle is speeding up. And so it could be that, the length of day that we experience is getting a little bit shorter because we're now spinning a little bit faster to compensate for the fact that the inner core is rotating a little bit slower.
Is it possible that it could be converted into heat and not kind of like rotational energy? Are there other outcomes, or are we looking at a potential fractional speed up or slow down of our day?
So it almost certainly the thing that we would see would be a fractional change in the length of the day. And we do measure these. We can measure the change in the length of day, and there's various effects that go on. So there's a long-term gradual slowing due to interactions with the moon that slows us down at about 1.8 milliseconds per century, which is not very much. And then there's annual changes as the Earth and the atmosphere exchange angular momentum, as it's called. The winds blow a little bit faster or a little bit slower, speed the Earth up and slow it down on the fractions of a second per year. And then there's various interactions that we think are interactions with the core, where there's these changes on the order of the length of day gets maybe 2 milliseconds longer or 2 milliseconds shorter over the period of a decade or so. And so this change that has been seen here is probably related to that sort of scale. And we have measured those, like we can measure those changes in the length of day. So, the length of day has been getting a little bit slower, a little bit longer. But there's this little bit of wobbling as it interacts, as the solid Earth interacts with the core.
Do we account for that using a mechanism like a leap millisecond? Because I know the official like ISO standard for what a second is really does depend on that day length. Do we account for it, or we just kind of say, whatever, it's a millisecond?
Yeah, it's all in there, right? And so when you exactly have to introduce a leap second or not introduce a leap second includes this sort of thing of there's a long-term change as we exchange angular momentum with the moon, as the moon sort of slows us down, but then as the rocky mantle and the core change angular momentum, that factors into when do we need to introduce leap seconds.
Got it. Well, let's talk volcanoes, because when I think core and magma and lava, I mean, that's the fun stuff. Is there any impact on the Earth's geology or volcanic activity, or do we just not know?
There's no known relation between what's going on in the Earth's core and things like volcanic activity or earthquakes. There's some suggestions that there's links to climate signals, but that would sort of be like an interaction. It's not that the core is influencing the climate necessarily so much as what goes on in the outer layers can sort of change, in this changing the rates of speed. There can be sort of like these harmonic setup where, what happens in the atmosphere affects the solid mantle, affects the core. But in terms of volcanoes and earthquakes, there's no evidence that there's any interaction there.
So what I'm hearing right now is there's 100% chance there'll be a super volcanic eruption that's going to kill us all in the next day. John, we're trying to get our soundbite here. Come on.
Well, there's 100% chance that there will be a super eruption at some point in the geological future.
On some planet somewhere in the universe.
Well, even on the Earth, like sooner or later, there'll be another big, eruption. There'll be another big earthquake. They will happen, but not to have anything to do with the Earth's core.
So you study geophysics. Is this interesting to you for any kind of nerdy reason that the media might not be reporting?
Yeah. So a lot of this, what I do is I study the Earth's core. I study sort of the geomagnetic field influences on the Earth's core, but I've also in planetary rotation. So I've studied planetary rotation in the past. And so there's a 6-year oscillation in the length of day. The length of day varies by about 0.2 milliseconds on a sort of a 6-year period. That's due to things going on in the Earth's core, possibly interactions between the Earth's core and the sort of the rocky mantle. That's the sort of thing that I study. So having seismic evidence of the fact that the Earth's core really does change its rotation is really interesting from my point of view, academically speaking.
Cool. Well, I'm excited to, I'm not going to read the paper, mostly because I won't understand it, but I'm excited to read the summary of the paper.
The other thing that's interesting is that the paper's been published. You might not read the paper, and the reviews of it were published. And you might not want to dig into all of the technical details, but one of the reviewers really did not like the paper.
This is the great stuff. This is why you're here. This is why I want to talk to you. What did that reviewer say?
I would have to pull up the exact quote, but there was something like publishing this paper would bring all of seismology into disrepute. Something like that. That's not an exact quote, but it's something like that. Really didn't like it. And there was 2 other reviewers who thought, actually, this is a great paper. These people have done great work. I really like this paper, but somebody really did not like their paper.
I looked you up. You have an impressive resume, an impressive CV. You've studied at Harvard, University of Toronto. You've got all these accolades, but I feel like the most important accolade is turn geology into disrepute. I mean, that's a great accolade.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, right. So I haven't done it, hopefully, but it was fun to sort of read it. You don't usually see that sort of language. Academic reports are often a bit dry and technical, and so it was interesting to see this sort of someone really get fired up and unhappy about what was being said. There's with these sorts of studies, there's like sort of the observations, and then there's the interpretation. The observations isn't really where the dispute was. It's sort of how they've interpreted. There are other ways you could interpret what they observed, and this reviewer obviously does not like their interpretation.
All right, coming up next, that reviewer. No, it's not the Jerry Springer show. I wish it was. John, thanks for going over this stuff with me. I appreciate you sharing about this research.
Yeah, absolutely.
Professor Jonathan Mound works at University of Leeds, where he's a professor of global geophysics. That is our show. Thank you for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow. And welcome home to me. From me, I think. If that makes any sense. It does. I was on vacation, now I'm not. That's the show!